From thatching to stonemasonry or metalwork, Britain's master craftsmen were central to every aspect of life. Down the centuries, their workmanship has defined the fabric of this country, from the grandest cathedral to the simplest of tools.
You can see now why people took the glass out their windows and travelled with it, didn't they?
There are still guardians of these crafts working today, who are dedicated to taking the long tradition of these skills into our modern world.
It's a constant pressure. That's the right sound.
In this series, complete beginners with a genuine passion to learn will be given an intensive introduction by some of these experts.
Your standards are so high compared to theirs, and you've somehow got to get them up to your standards.
But can a complete novice master even the basic elements of the craft in a short space of time, however intensive?
Believe you me, I shall master that.
There. Excellent.
And will they have acquired the skills to make something that is both beautiful and useful?
This is a really accomplished field which we're attempting to dip our toe into. So there is an element of inspiration coupled with a sort of humble feeling.
The knowledge and skills of glass were brought to this country by the Romans. Now, they guarded that secret very jealously, so it wasn't until they left after 400 years that it was disseminated across the country. And that coincided with the arrival of Christianity. So from the outset, stained glass was portrayed in the great churches and cathedrals of the country.
The first golden age of stained glass started in the middle of the 12th century and coincided with the existing Romanesque architectural order, making way for the more elegant Gothic style. This was characterized by pointed arches and heavily buttressed walls that allowed vast openings to be possible in the walls, and that, in turn, allowed for huge windows.
This great northern cathedral of York Minster has more glass in it than any other building in Britain. 128 medieval stained glass windows. That's 2 million separate pieces of glass. Now, every fragment of that had one main purpose, and that was to pour God's light onto the worshippers inside. And this light that came through was just a glimpse of the light that awaited them in the afterlife.
My first experiences of stained glass windows came when I was a child sitting in church, which I had to go to every Sunday, and seeing these saints with slightly pained expressions, but with wonderful light streaming through them and the colours as they're reflected. But to be honest, I never really thought how they were made, and I don't know to this day. So one of the really interesting things for me will be to learn myself just how this is done and the background to them. Sophia Hussain has been working with stained glass for nearly 20 years. She usually works alone, but for the next 6 weeks in this studio in South London, she'll be taking on 3 apprentices, attempting to pass on to them the skills of her ancient craft. I want to know what you're expecting from this group. They're going to appear soon enough.
After knowing all the tools and all, the ways that we can change the surface of glass, they ought to be able to make a commission in a professional way of quality.
So are you going to work them hard?
I have to, we only have 6 weeks. And to get the best out of someone, I think they have to learn and they have to knuckle down.
The 3 apprentices each have their own reasons for wanting to master the craft of stained glass. Valerie Rolls is 67 and has spent her entire adult life bringing up children and putting herself last. And now she's hoping to realise a lifetime's ambition.
Being trained by a master craftsman is something I've always wanted, dreamt of, never thought would happen. So it will be absolutely marvellous if I accomplish something really wonderful.
James Wignall is in his final year of a 6-year architectural degree. He's specialising in glass, and in particular is fascinated by stained glass and how it could be applied to modern design.
It's very rare you see kind of a beautiful piece of modern stained glass, especially kind of in the architectural world, in the built environment. And What I'm interested in is how can I learn these traditional things and contemporise it so it's viable for a new type of architecture.
2 years ago, Abigail Riddyhoff gave up her job as an A-level graphic design teacher to have her daughter, Zuzu. And she's hoping that studying stained glass might give her a new direction for her return to work.
If there was an opportunity at the end of all of this to learn to such an extent that I could actually use this skill as a new way of making money in my life, I would love it.
What will you be looking for in them as people that are good markers?
A little bit of flair, intuition, skill, and a bit of courage.
So no pressure then. Flair, intuition, skill, courage.
The commitment to this has got to be full on, which means putting Zuzu to the back of my mind, which is something I've never done before.
It is not going to be easy. I'm going to be exhausted, but there is no way will I fail at stained glass.
My main strengths are enthusiasm and energy and willingness to have a go and to experiment and see what happens and not be too concerned with the output, but it could produce something amazing.
This is it?
This is
your home for the next 6 weeks, where presumably there'll be a lot of effort and tears and sweat and God knows what. And this is your mentor, this is Sophie.
How do you do?
Hi, Sophie.
Nice to meet you.
What she
Hello.
doesn't know
Hi.
about glass is not worth knowing. And this is Sophie's work, of course.
This window is what Sophie produced at the end of her apprenticeship.
And is that the sort of thing you want to do?
in my dreams.
This is what I expect of you after just 6 weeks.
In fact, it took Sophie 3 years to master all the skills demonstrated in this window. But her new trainees have much less time than that, so there's not a moment to waste.
Coats off, bags down, tie hair back.
Throughout the next 6 weeks, the group will become familiar with the basic tools and skills of the trade, from cutting glass to leading and soldering the pieces into a finished panel. At the end of their brief apprenticeship, applying all the techniques they've learned, they'll each design a window which could end up being installed in a public building. But that's 6 hard weeks away, and first they must learn the craft from scratch.
The first thing that anybody who wants to work with stained glass must master is cutting glass. Now that may sound obvious, but actually we have an instinct that resists breaking glass. And first they need to use the right tool, which is a glass cutter, and then how to use it with exactly the right pressure, and that's critical.
For today, we will use our glass cutters, which is this one. At the end of your glass cutter, there's a very small wheel, yeah? So you take the wheel right to the edge of the glass.
The steel wheel rolls across the surface of the glass to create a score line.
It's a constant pressure. That's the right sound. The stress of hitting the glass underneath brings the cut from the score mark down. You can just cut it off like that, yeah? So with your goggles on, put your glass cutter right at the edge of the piece of glass at the top. Just want you to cut it. Yeah, no breaking, just cutting. Yeah, you've got it. Right, okay.
It's quite a
I'll show
pressure.
you. And I'm going to hold your hand. Yeah?
Yeah.
You feel the pressure, the difference?
Yes, yeah.
Go on.
In the Middle Ages, glazers would run a red-hot iron over the glass to create cracks and then snap and nibble it into shape with a set of pliers known as a glazing iron. But though modern tools make life a little easier, the skills needed to use them properly are still demanding.
You have to press so hard, my fingers just aren't strong enough.
Making sure.
How does this go with your age?
Well, I wouldn't have thought that it did in the beginning, but I'm getting rather nervous now.
What are you nervous of?
Because I haven't managed to do it immediately. But believe you me, I shall master that.
In any stained glass window, there are only 2 types of cut.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, that was good.
And having practiced straight cutting, Sophie moves the group on to the slightly more challenging one.
I suggest that you treat a very gentle curve as your next project, and it's a good idea to start at the bottom of the line because you have to follow the curve with the glass cutter. And you do need to put quite a bit of pressure on. So you ready?
Yep.
Yeah?
A stained glass window is a jigsaw of individual pieces held together by lead. And just like a jigsaw, each piece must fit exactly. Otherwise, the whole picture will be ruined.
Okay, no tapping until I'm there, please.
By the end of their training, our apprentices must be able to cut glass confidently and with absolute accuracy to stand a chance of producing a successful window.
I can cut the glass, I can't follow the curve, that's all.
And the only way to attain that is practice.
I can feel where it's gone wrong.
Yeah.
And occasionally on some of them you can kind of see where the pressure's released and you don't get that constant cut. And then it's really hard to snap.
It'll come. After their first full day, the trainees head home with a much clearer sense of what lies ahead of them.
It doesn't always seem under control with me, and I don't think it is yet. Kind of the tapping of the glass and actually keeping the constant pressure.
For the next 6 weeks, Val and Abby will be sharing a flat and both coping with the extra challenge of being away from home.
Well, my first day has been a roller coaster ride. I felt I'd bitten off more than I could chew.
Stained glass is actually going to be much more hard than I first anticipated. But I'd love to have a go at applying one of my designs or one of my creative ideas to this medium.
It's just so important. I've got a chance in a lifetime to do some incredible work, and it's just quite frightening, really.
The 3 trainees spent their first day just cutting glass and getting a feel for the material. But Sophie now moves her students onto the key to mastering the whole craft: controlled accuracy.
Every stained glass window starts with a cut line, like this. Every piece of glass that is cut has to be cut on the inside of every single black line.
These lines represent the centre or the heart of the leads that will ultimately hold each piece of glass in place and must be followed exactly.
You have on your desk a cut line. Your task today is to fill this cut line with pieces of glass.
First cut of the day.
Fingers like so, and these two index parallel, snap it away from you quickly. Fantastic.
To pass the task, each cut piece must lie within the cut line and have a gap of just 1 millimetre all the way round.
I like to work quite messily. I like things to be much less controlled than this. And I think I might struggle with the precision a little bit here, but we shall see.
Abby is already demonstrating a degree of confidence and natural ability.
Quite enjoy cutting glass. I didn't think I would because it feels quite dangerous as well, but I relish it. It's really satisfying.
But as he predicted, James is struggling with the precision.
Whenever I seem to try and follow one of these curves, my hand seems to wiggle a little bit. So it goes in and out by maybe it's only a mil and a half, but it's enough.
And Val continues to struggle with the whole business of cutting.
Gotta go home. It is stressful. There's an awful lot to learn, and because there's other students who seem to have grasped it now, for me, that is added pressure.
That is where I want your wheel, and just slowly all the way, okay? Can you see? Go on, keep going, keep going. Keep going. There, excellent.
Obviously, our trainees start their work with the lowest grade glass possible because they're going to ruin it, quite frankly. But as they progress and want to do something more special, particularly if they're doing restoration work, they've got to use the appropriate glass, which is often incredibly beautiful and skillfully made. Now, in Georgian times, British blown plate glass, which is what you need to make good stained glass, was the best in the world. But now in the 21st century, there's just one place left in the country making blown plate glass, and it's here.
This factory in Redditch still makes glass using techniques developed in the 12th century. Glass is coloured or stained with minerals, and this is a technique that's been used since medieval times. So you can see that this sheet of blue glass, which is coloured with cobalt, has this incredibly rich blue, and you can see the imperfections in it, which give it life. Down here, we've got the most valuable glass of all, which is pink glass. This is all about the eye and the hand working together with precious materials to make something everlastingly beautiful. Glass was traditionally produced by heating sand and wood ash to around 1500 degrees centigrade. And every pane of glass here starts its life as part of a molten orange pool in a furnace known as a bosch.
This is called gathering. So that's gathering. Ball is your foundation. Right.
Once the ball of glass is gathered, it's then blown to gradually expand it.
That is unbelievable. You're blowing up a balloon of glass.
It is then swung to allow gravity to elongate the sides, before the molten end is pierced and then opened out to create a cylinder known as a moth. The moth is then placed in a kiln where it is very gradually cooled to anneal or strengthen the glass.
First thing in the morning we take them out of the kiln when they're nice and cold, and this is the next process on towards the flattening.
The round end is removed and a narrow strip is cut along the length of the moth to allow it to flatten out.
Basically, these cylinders then slowly go down. There's a few burners in the tunnel, and basically we get the temperature quite hot towards the end, and as they go down the tunnel, the glass starts to soften.
It is like a sort of curling piece of paper.
I mean, it's sort of got almost like a toffee sort of texture at the moment. I mean, the idea is to pick it up, give it a bit of heat, so that when you finally lay it down, it's quite soft. And then you can just bring in this big block of wood, and then you just basically just run it over it. Once you're happy that you've got it as flat as possible, push this button there, and then you take it over.
Right.
This is the sort of the cooling process.
Okay.
You just pick it up and then drop it down onto this belt there, which starts off at 500 degrees, and then it'll take about an hour and 20 to get to the other side.
So here we have a piece of glass that is full of imperfections, ripples and colour, and alive.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's
why our customers like our glass.
Yeah.
We can match in colour, but in design and style, they're all unique.
Do you know what that sells for, retail?
That's around about the £45 mark.
Right, so that. You can see now why, when glass first became common in windows, people took the glass out their windows and travelled with it, didn't they?
Yes.
Just like their jewellery.
Oh, it was a very expensive commodity back then, yeah. It still is in our book, yeah.
Back at the studio, and 3 days into their 6-week training, the group have now filled in their cut lines and are ready to move on.
What I want to do now is introduce you into building colour into your designs, just so you can see what weight colour has upon your design, because you get to choose where you put the colours.
The trainees must fill their cut lines all over again, but this time using coloured glass.
Don't you do anything?
I'm just about to cut my first bit of coloured glass. Hopefully perfectly. Oh God, I'm nervous. The pressure involved is very difficult.
Oh, it's radically different, this stuff. Oh, what the hey. Colour is super important. So of course it's like a whole next stage up. It's like a different level. That's what stained glass is all about. So here we are finally with the colour, which is brilliant, but also a little bit nerve-wracking.
As ever, precision is critical, because once they've cut their coloured pieces, they will then lead them up. And if they're not absolutely accurate, they just won't fit.
I think you're over the line here.
I try and do it quickly sometimes and don't do the excess. Do you know when it's quite tempting to just go, oh, I can fit it all in?
He's actually forgotten about the lead line completely.
Well, he hasn't forgotten.
He's slid off course.
His skill isn't as good.
He's 2 or 3 mil out this side, and he's taken this would not fit, and your window would not fit. I'd have to fail you.
Okay.
like James, maybe flying ahead a little bit too much and going quite fast in terms of the skills base that's needed, which is really about being dead careful and really precise. I think that once we start leading, we're going to suddenly realise how foolish it was to try and do this fast.
After cutting your glass, then you go about leading. Leading's what keeps your glass together.
Lead comes in long H sections known as cames. The first of these is laid against a straight piece of wood lined up on the bottom of the cut line.
We call them in the trade laths. And once you're 100% happy, you send your nails home. And then you do exactly the same thing on the upright.
With the first two laths nailed in place, the window can now be built up from this fixed corner, with each bit of glass slotting into place, and the lead bent round it exactly following the cut line.
There is the heart of my outside lead. There's the heart of this lead, and my glass is resident in that white space.
So, after 4 days just cutting glass, the trainees learn to join the hopefully precise shapes together.
Start placing your glass in. It's up against the heart of the lead, right? Does it fit there? It's gone over the cut line. Is that supposed to happen?
Well, I didn't think it mattered because...
It was at the end.
It was at the end.
Bearing in mind, if all your glass is cut right, the next piece of glass will fit in the heart,
Yes.
and you'll just keep on
So
going.
So far,
Yeah.
The tools used for leading are a straight lead knife for cutting the cames to length, an oyster knife for lifting the edges or leaves of the lead, and a ready supply of horseshoe nails, which are a remnant of the craft's medieval origins, whose flat edges are perfect for holding everything in place during construction.
I'm doing my first curve. What do you do?
As lead is very soft, it's easy to cut and shape to fit around the pieces of glass.
See all the kinks in it? Just try and iron them out with your fingers. Yeah?
Internally, the leads must butt right up against each other to ensure a smooth finish, whilst around the edges they need to tuck inside the perimeter lead to give the window stability.
I'm so proud of myself to be, after a week, this far. Look, that looks like a bit of stained glass to me.
It may look the part, but to join it all together and keep it rigid, it must now be soldered.
I'm looking forward to the soldering because it means I've finished this rather traumatic window, and I'm going to take it home with me. I'm going to kick my husband out of bed and I'm going to sleep with it, and I'm going to say, I did that.
The first stage of soldering is to dab the joints with tallow. This is simply animal fat and allows the solder to flow easily across the lead and prevent it from beading. Solder is an alloy of tin and lead that's melted with a hot iron on the joints to bind them together. It must lie flat and look neat, otherwise it will spoil the finish. Apart from the use of electric irons, this whole process has remained largely unchanged since the Middle Ages.
Right, you can do it. Right, just keep it there a bit longer. You're bodging it now, big time.
I'm not bodging it on
Leave it on,
purpose.
I think you're putting far too much solder on.
Okay.
Do you know, I found something that he's not very good at.
I won't be doing that.
That's a nice one, that's a nice one.
Cool.
That's really good, that's really good, because that's your first time. I'm really impressed.
Thank you so much.
Excellent.
So, after a week of cutting, leading and soldering, the trainees' first windows now face the light.
This is where you hope it all rolls together.
As they remove the laths, they know the only thing that will stop their windows from falling apart is the quality of their craftsmanship.
Oh, wow. Oh, it didn't fall to pieces. It's like a solid thing.
This is a test, and you've proved you can do it really well.
We've got another one.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
Like that, and like that.
Hooray.
Hooray! I didn't think in the beginning, the first day where I was crying, weeping and wailing and tearing my raiment to shreds, I didn't think I would end up with a finished window. I didn't, I honestly didn't.
So, despite some doubts, the trainees have successfully constructed their first window. But if they want a career in stained glass, they'll also have to learn the more delicate art of repairing old ones.
Medieval stained glass needs constant conservation. And when they were made, there were thousands of stained glass master craftsmen. Now there are fewer than 1,000 in the whole of Britain, and almost all their work is in conservation and restoration.
Many cathedrals have dedicated workshops that constantly maintain exquisite windows that have illuminated almost every sacred building for the past 1,000 years.
Nick here is cleaning the piece that goes at the very apex of the tracery of the window, and this is God at the head of the whole of the glorious display. And what strikes me as incredible about this is the detail is literally a hair's width. Now you can't possibly see that. It's stuck right up, high on the wall. And that devotion to detail has to be carefully preserved. So just cleaning away the grime is done with minute care so that nothing is damaged. And finally, the historical aspects have to be documented. And for each section, hundreds of hours of work will be given.
Chapel Studios in Hertfordshire is one of the most respected conservation workshops in the country. And the group will spend the afternoon here, helping to dismantle a 150-year-old Victorian window.
It's a very important process, it's a very delicate process. You have to take your time, you have to really concentrate on what you're doing, because if you don't, you can end up cracking the glass unnecessarily, and that's what we don't want to happen. That would be a complete disaster.
This is how surgeons do it.
What kind of surgeons?
People who dissect a 150-year-old window. I'm ready.
We're going to spray the area that we're going to start dismantling because we want to keep the lead dust down as much as we possibly can, because it's very, very harmful.
Old lead is especially dangerous, as it may have oxidised, so the dust must be damped down to prevent inhalation.
That's all nice and wet. So with your pliers, you apply gentle pressure halfway. It's only to the heart of the lead, and you pull and it will just slip off. And then once you're free and you can see daylight, then you can snip and you can pull away the lead. And you're just rocking it backwards and forwards, but you're also supporting the glass with your hand.
By working on these windows, the group are experiencing at first hand the level of craftsmanship that they must achieve if they're to make anything as long-lasting as this themselves.
You've got nowhere to fall, no safety net. If you get this wrong, you've broken a 150-year-old piece of work. Okay.
It's a little scary, isn't it?
Scary.
It's actually very nice to be doing something with a bit of history.
But the burden of history proves to be too heavy for one of the group.
How do you feel now?
I feel very hot and sweaty and slightly faint.
Oh.
I won't want that responsibility. Okay. I'd rather do it with some horrible old window that doesn't matter, but not something precious. I have a great reverence for this sort of work, so no, I don't want to attempt it. No.
I think today's been probably the most successful day out of anything, or for me anyway. I mean, it just gives some meaning to anything we've done up to now, and it kind of gives some reference.
I'm sure when we go back, all of us will understand. Well, we did understand, but it sort of gives you another dimension to it.
The skill now for me has become much more important, and I think I was not sort of disrespectful of that skill, but I think I just was a bit more flippant about it. Now I'm going to concentrate harder, I think.
Church windows like these were produced during the 19th century Gothic revival, when the Victorians enthusiastically rediscovered stained glass. They also brought it into the home, and it's one of these classic domestic designs that Sophie wants the trainees to tackle next.
I've got a new quest for you. I want you to choose a design from these books, blow it up to actual size. I want you to cut the glass for this, and I want you to lead it up completely. I want you to do it all properly from start to finish.
A professional glass cutter might expect to cut and lead up a window like this in an afternoon. But to allow the group time to practice and get it right, Sophie has given them 3 days.
I want you to challenge yourself. I want you to make this the best you can, because I am going to crit you at the end of this.
They must each choose a design that can be completed within the allotted time and their individual skill level.
I'd rather do a simple thing.
Properly. You know, you could have that, look.
Could I do that?
Yeah, do you want to do that?
Yeah,
but that is lovely.
It is lovely. I do like it.
Yeah?
Abby has so far been the best at cutting, but has struggled with her accuracy.
I've chosen something that's perhaps a little bit more simple because the challenge lies in precision and it's a pattern, and if a pattern looks irregular it's going to be awful.
But James seems to be more intent on following his own agenda than the brief.
I'm going to take a section of this drawing.
Right, okay. And what size are you going to blow it up to? You must remember...
640mm square at the moment.
Ooh, okay. I think you're stretching yourself. Yeah, make it smaller because you're just not going to get it cut in 3 days.
I mean, I'm not overly concerned if it's finished. I'd rather just have a go at something I kind of enjoy.
I do say that you have to finish it. Otherwise, no one's going to take this seriously. He fails if he doesn't finish, you know? It's wrong. I don't expect... It's not, you know, what's the point of the exercise? What's the point of being here? Unless you actually fulfill the brief.
Although they each have exactly the same time to complete the task, Val elects to make a panel of 27 pieces, Abby 37, and James 47.
Oh, look at that. Woo! The first shape.
For the next few days, these panels will fully test the trainees' skills in the studio.
You've got beautiful cutting skill.
I must admit I actually really like it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
But so they can experience the inevitable multitasking of a professional glazer, Sophie adds to their pressure with some extra homework.
Stained glass has always been about portraying some kind of message, you know, it's a very rich medium to work in. So I want you to go away from today and come up with a design.
The homework.
Yeah, that's your homework.
It's the first brief I like.
Lovely.
3D stained glass.
Yay! Okay.
To help inspire and inform their designs for a story window, Sophie takes them on a tour of some modern examples in the company of stained glass expert Caroline Swash.
That is quite some window. These golden ribbons represent the 5 sacred brothers, really, who offered themselves in death, but actually lived. And they are the ones who are crucial founders, really, of Sikhism.
You look at the orange, which totally coils and moves and is beautifully fluid, and you can see it moving over each other. If you look at the blue, which is quite safe and is behind, the blue and the orange make individual shapes on their own in each square, and the shapes which are outside of the main context are also just as important as the design itself.
Whenever you're designing glass, you have to remember that usually, especially in the public building, the people who view it are never static.
And nowhere exemplifies this sense of people in constant motion more than a modern train station.
Hey, look! There now. So in the centre, that's the new escutcheon of Uxbridge, and then the 2 supporting boroughs, Middlesex, and on the other side is Buckinghamshire. It's saying something very positive to the people who live here. So they're coming back from work to their town, and that is greeting them. And that says home, but it says home with status. Yeah. So it's similar in tradition to the Tudor era. There were coats of arms which were in the grand houses to show that you were absolutely marvellous. So this is a public work which is saying the same thing.
This is a really accomplished field which we're attempting to dip our toe into. So there is an element of inspiration coupled with a sort of humble feeling.
Following their field trip, the 3 trainees start work on their own designs.
I think the task set by Sophie is really interesting. I think working in stories kind of gives everything another level, opposed to just being ornamental. It becomes far more interesting for anyone to read into something or an idea or a concept.
I'm really excited because it is the first time we're going to be allowed to use our own creativity. Of course, at the same time, I feel like I'm back at college and suddenly my creativity is going to be under the spotlight, but it's what I've been waiting for.
I don't have any idea what I'm going to do yet. It'll suddenly come to me, but a good night's sleep now, it'll be there.
The next morning, it's back to the studio. Though the trainees are all clearly itching to express themselves creatively, they first need to finish their Victorian panels to a high standard within the set time.
I'm being super critical on you because you really don't have long to grasp this.
Okay.
The schedule is asking a lot from them, but essential if they want to become good enough to make a stained glass window fit for public scrutiny. But it proves too much for Val.
I'm very sorry, but you're going to have to go back and cut that. Never mind, it's all right.
No, I'm not going to cry.
Val?
Feel like it.
Val, another thing. Come here, chick. Come here. Come here. Come here. Come here.
Really annoyed with myself, but the pressure of the time is what I don't seem to, you know, that's what then, the minute I know, and I know that's part of it, but the minute I know I've got time, and then I suddenly think, oh, I can't do this, I start rushing, I've got to get finished, and then I just make silly mistakes.
With time running out and still much work needed by all three to finish their panels, there's no choice but to work late into the night.
What do you think is really important after this 2-week stage to enable them to progress onto the next stage?
I'd like to have a crit with them on their windows of what they've produced so far and actually hone in on the areas of their weakness.
After burning the midnight oil, Abby did complete her Victorian panel, and she's the first to surface to find out how she's done.
What you have is a lovely looking piece. I think it looks fantastic. But looking closely, you can see through all sorts of places on it.
Probably because this lead was too long. It doesn't have contact with the glass, yeah? This square here...
See through that one as well.
See through that one, but also we've got a little bit of see-through here. I can also see solder over the joint.
Yeah.
These are all things which you know how to do because you can do them everywhere else. You've just been rushing.
Next in is James, who, despite choosing easily the most difficult panel to make, did manage to finish it in time.
Firstly, your lead lines are slightly short.
They're slightly short in the smallest ones, because these were such a struggle to kind of
see this one here. This
forms.
one misses this horizontal lead by quite a considerable amount. I think the glass is cut relatively well. There are these corners here which the lead ought to have come down to follow, so that would need to have been a more acute angle.
Yeah. The cutting of the glass is what I spent most of my time on.
And I think that you've mastered, and you're one of the only students that can tap a glass for the start of a cut, and he manipulates the cut with his fingers, which is an extraordinary technique taken up by someone so young in the trade.
So you got that?
Got that?
Yeah.
It's the thing I spent most time on.
Well, perhaps there's a connection between those two things. Yeah.
Finally, it is Val's turn, who, despite choosing the simplest design of the three, failed to complete it within the deadline.
When I saw this last, Val had done a beautiful job. All this glazing here it was exceptional, yeah?
Was or is?
Was, because the glazing last night that took place, it looks like that you were rushed and there's some kind of stained glass atrocity going on there.
In the end, I just was so tired, I thought, just finish it off and learn something in the process, but I will never rush again like that.
You need just to be able to crack
I just
that.
need time, full stop.
Again, another thing.
Another time.
Another time issue.
The group clearly felt a pressure to finish things at the expense of quality. But to master the craft, they need to work both accurately and quickly.
your standards are so high compared to theirs, and you've somehow got to get them up to your standards.
I can't pass any of those windows upstairs. I can't let them out of the studio. I couldn't dare ask money for them.
It's radical, but I suggest scrapping the project they're doing and spending the rest of this week working on basics.
Oh, God, I'd love that, yeah.
I don't think there should be any design element in it at all. It's all technical. I mean, the final project, they've got to make something that, as you say, has got to go out of your studio.
Yeah,
properly.
exactly.
With the Victorian panels now completed, the group have eagerly moved on to working on their own designs, but not for long.
Can we have your full, undivided attention?
I'm abandoning this project that you're working on. Keep the cut lines on your bench. Take a segment of 10 inches that you like and that's challenging. You will then offer the drawing to the person on your right.
So what you will do is make each other's design. And you've got all week to do that. All the focus will be on the quality, not the content.
So the idea that we've had for the story is irrelevant? Okay.
Go on.
I totally see the point about kind of our weakness in the actual making. But the thing that interests me is the story and the craft mixed together.
To refocus the group on craft rather than creativity, they must each hand over a 10-inch section of their design.
Just been given James's cut line.
So part of James's window depicting St Matthew will now be cut by Abby.
I'm quite looking forward to getting stuck into some precise glass cutting.
A section of Abby's design depicting the Big Bang Theory will now be cut by Val. And part of Val's design, depicting the evils of the demon drink, will be cut by James.
It's not any different to copying anything out of the book, because it's still not your own baby.
Traditionally, an apprentice would work for 5 years, steadily perfecting their skills. But after 4 fast-track weeks, the trainees are now realising that some things just can't be rushed.
I actually feel that it's a pretty good idea that we've gone back to basics on the cutting and the skills, because we would have struggled again to meet the deadline, and we would have struggled again with the actual craft.
And perhaps no one has benefited more from the slackened pace than Val.
Val is doing a very meticulous job now.
Don't you think it's brilliant?
Yeah, I'm very pleased I've actually finished.
Do you know, that is so Art Deco.
She really grasped the aspect of what to do whilst cutting glass.
Having proved their commitment to the craft, Sophie gives her charges the evening off and shares with them a rather different type of glass.
Cheers.
Cheers.
What brand? Oh my God.
Cheers.
Glamorous world, stained glasses.
It's now 4 weeks since our apprentices began their introduction into the craft of stained glass. And here, at Harris Academy in Peckham, is where it will all end in 2 weeks' time, when they present the results of their final task.
You are going to be designing and working out what will go in glass in that long, thin strip of empty space above the doors. It is an absolutely fabulous spot for glass. And now I'd like Kathy, who's head, to tell you about what she would like to have in the windows.
Thank you, and welcome to the Harris Academy at Peckham today. This is our reception area, and what I'm sort of looking for in terms of a design for the windows is something that reflects the ethnic diversity of the Academy. Our students and our staff come from many different countries of the world. One of the other things that I'd like to see here is that I really want this to feel a very sort of warm and welcoming area, and I think colour is quite important in that.
Looking at these, you should realise that they are going to be divided, each of the openings, into 3, with, as it were, a central opening and 2 flanks. And it is one of those squares that you're going to make up into glass, but you're going to be designing for the whole run. And that you will be presenting for judgment by Kathy. The idea is that the winner will then go on and do the whole lot.
I'm over the moon now that we're actually going to be able to execute our own design ideas, so I'm really excited about that, finally.
It would be fantastic to have something installed that could potentially be there for hundreds of years or whatever. I don't know how long the school will last, but potentially for a long time.
to be truthful, I'm not 100% happy with my cutting. I think that's always been a weak spot from the beginning. That is something I just improve on all the time, and hopefully I shall be able to do it good enough for a window. That is a question mark, really.
The apprentices must now use all the skills that they've learned to create a window with a story that speaks clearly to everyone who looks upon it. And as such, they'll be following in some pretty awe-inspiring footsteps.
Having spent time here at York, and I guess at any cathedral with wonderful stained glass, is that this is a craft based upon devotion. Obviously devotion to a particular religion, but also devotion to the craft, and the two are intermingled. And the next step for our trainees is to take that tradition of hundreds of years of devotion to the craft and apply it to making a story out of glass filled with light.
Val, Abby and James have each spent a few days working on designs for their window, with varying degrees of success.
The plan is to have the window itself in situ as a stained glass, and then have various different hangings of colour in front of it, so depending where you are, you kind of get different colours supposedly coming out.
The design started off as the sea. It flows along and it goes off different countries, which these children are all from different countries. They come to a difficult bit, but they surmount it and climb over it and carry on their path.
This is the actual entire length of the windows that we're designing for, but we're only making 1/3 of one window, and this is the bit here that I am making. And I found this really fantastic poem that I love. Do you want me to read it to you? I used to think nurses were women. I used to think police were men. I used to think poets were boring until I became one of them. It's totally inspirational and it challenges stereotypes.
By introducing text into her design, Abby will need to acquire another skill of the glazer's art, which at this late stage is potentially a risky decision.
God.
Like many parts of the craft, painting has remained unchanged since its medieval origins. It involves applying special glass paint to the surface, then firing it in a kiln at around 650 degrees centigrade. The thickness of the paint, the temperature of the kiln and the time that it's spent in there will all alter the finish, and it's a matter of trial and error.
Why has it done that? Gosh, that's just normal glass. Look, it's completely changed. Well, that's the piece of glass that I'm going to be using. This is good for me. It's come out okay.
As time ticks on, James still hasn't settled on a final design and seems more interested in the concept of his window than answering the brief and telling a simple, coherent story.
Playing with things is more important than kind of a finished article for me in many ways.
But by constantly playing with things, Sophie feels that so far he's failed to produce his best idea.
I'm just disappointed that you can't make anything better, because I know you can.
Val, however, continues to persevere, trying to balance her desire to make progress with her respect for the perfectionism she knows the craft demands.
Needs cutting again.
James, rapidly running out of time, finally comes up with a design and starts making it.
I'm tickled pink, you know. I'm so pleased with what he's actually come up with. It's a very modern design, and I think he's done so well. I really can't wait to see this one being made.
As the deadline looms uncomfortably close for each of them, the apprentices not only have to complete their small panels to a very high technical standard, but also have to prepare to sell the overall design for the whole window to the client.
Look at that! Oh, wow! Tomorrow I feel pretty good about, really. There's nothing more to do. There's no more horrifically scary processes involving glass, cement, bits of lead, solder.
I've just got no more to give. I feel so ill. I cannot go on.
Six weeks ago, 3 very different people came into that workshop, all of them with very strong ideas and
feelings about stained glass, but no experience. Not one of them had ever cut a piece of glass before. And it seems scarcely possible, but here we are in the middle of London with one of them having the real chance of having a stained glass window that they've designed and made themselves put up in a big school. Now that is extraordinary. The task of picking a winning design will be down to 2 judges. The first is Catherine Loxton, the principal of Harris Academy, who set the initial brief and whose school the windows will ultimately adorn. The second is Harry Cardross, a leading designer of architectural stained glass, whose own dramatic story window the group visited earlier in their training. He'll be judging the technical merits of the finished panels in light of his own considerable experience of the demands of putting story windows into public buildings.
Wow, my goodness. This one is the most difficult to make. This one is the simplest, and this one's sort of in the middle.
Right.
This almost has a look of a glass sample piece. There's so many different textures and colours, and I just feel it's probably got a little bit too much going on. But to get these lines to follow through exactly is not particularly easy to do. And certainly at first glance, it looks very, very neat. I mean, he's got a break.
Right.
It could have happened after this window is installed and there's a storm, the window shakes.
So it's a weak point.
It's a potential weak point.
Okay, let's move on to this one.
Right, this is interesting because they've actually chosen some of these glasses here which are opalescent, which reflect a lot of light. So at night, when the lights are on inside, you're going to get colour in some of these areas, and I think there's a nice variety, although they've kept a very limited colour palette. These long, straight lines, they are a bit easier to cut, but they're not necessarily easier to lead, and that line needs to be run through.
What about the painting?
Right. I think they've been quite sensible in using a very wobbly font.
It actually looks quite nice, the roughness of it, doesn't it?
Yes.
But there are flaws. Right, the final one.
Well, this has got a very, very nice use of glass. Quite a reasonably limited palette of colours, but nice different types and textures of glass. The soldering's a bit messy, the way the leads flow into each other. This design can get away with it because it's slightly freer.
It's got great light, hasn't it?
But it has got, and that's really quite difficult to do, dealing with these very rigid materials.
How, in general, are you rating them?
I think remarkable, I would say. In 6 weeks, to have come from nothing to get to this standard is a real credit to their abilities.
Having judged the individual panels on their technical merit, the trainees must now convince Catherine that their overall designs have something relevant to say to the pupils of her school. So if you just tell us the story behind your design. After 6 weeks of intense immersion in the craft, everything now hinges on this.
I developed the idea of using geometry to represent community. So the circle became this image of community and togetherness.
This poem is about challenging stereotypes. It's about diversity. It's about aspiration.
Everybody at all ages have problems. Just look at it and think, I can get over that and go on.
Okay, thanks very much, Val. I will try and get these two to come to an amicable decision, and then we'll come down and let you know what it is.
We've got a very difficult decision to make, I think.
And it was very impressive, the amount of thought that they'd put into all of these.
I mean, obviously it would be lovely to have the thing completed and made. So yeah, I mean, it would be great, but I don't know. I mean, I guess we'll wait and see what happens. I don't really want to get my hopes up too much.
James's design here, what really appeals to me is the amount of thought that he's put into it and what he's come out with as a result of that. I suppose my only concern about it is that it is very abstract, and in some ways that's a challenge for the students to work out what it actually says. On the other hand, would they just walk past it?
I couldn't say who I thought was worthy of winning. It'd be just such an achievement and so thrilling for whoever does win. It's going to be lovely.
It's bright, it's accessible, sort of thing the students would actually notice. The poem they would recognise, a very famous poet is part of a GCSE course. Students would identify with it immediately. Would it stand the test of time? I don't know.
I'm a little bit apprehensive. I'm like, have I got it quite right, the design? I don't know.
If you had to pick one person that you could really develop their skill as a glass artist, it would be Valerie.
I'm not sure that it has stuck to the brief. To me, it doesn't speak about the community, but on its own, it's a lovely, lovely piece of work.
They've all got flaws, but they've all got huge virtues.
Yes.
And it's just a question of which would work best in that space. Would either of you like to move towards a decision, or do you want to go on? There you are, sitting there expectantly. Well, we can give you an answer. The judges have come to a decision, and they first of all felt that all three were of astonishingly high standard, especially given that it's just 6 weeks, but even so, were of a high standard. But a decision with great difficulty was arrived at, and Kathy's going to tell you which one it was.
Thank you very much indeed. So I'm delighted to say, Abigail, we chose your design. So many congratulations.
Thank you so much. So smashing. Thank you.
All of them individually have got 10 out of 10 for me. Fantastic work.
It's not just been about stained glass, there's been many areas that have been good for me as a person.
We've had fun, haven't we, Val?
We've had great fun. We've had a ball, haven't we?
Just 3 weeks ago, these were a pretty inaccurate trio. They were much more interested in expressing themselves than the means of expression. But what they've shown from these really impressive pieces of glass, they're stunning, is that without that accuracy, without that devotion to mastering the necessary crafts, you can't express yourself properly.
4 weeks later, and only just over 3 months since Abby first took up the craft of stained glass, she returns to see her completed window installed in the school.
It's fantastic, isn't it?
And here it will now remain, spreading its message in streams of coloured sunlight to generations of children for as long as they pass below.
It's just gorgeous to see it and doing its job up there for everybody to see, and to see it with all the colours. It's thrilling. I feel a bit quite elated, actually.
Next time, a fashion designer, an ex-business analyst, and a craft writer grapple with one of the most ancient and complicated of all crafts.
I feel like I'm wound round by a yarn, and if only I can just untangle.
And while they try not to tie themselves in knots,
To think I've got to thread these all individually. I should be really happy, but I'm not.
I'll be discovering more about the importance of weaving in our royal history.
These are actually the finest tapestries in the world.